Welcome to Jews on Film, the podcast where we look at films both old and new through our unique Jewish lens. I'm Harry Adensasser, and I'm your Jewish film podcaster.
And my name is Daniel Zana. I'm a documentary filmmaker, a video editor. But now that I'm in America, Harry, Jason, I want you to just call me Dan, you know? Just call me Danny. Our guest today is a best-selling author, editor, and cultural critic whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Esquire, and many more. He founded Volume 1 Brooklyn and is the author of Searching for John Hughes and the Sprawl. His debut novel, Kaplan's Plot, is available now wherever you get your books. Jason Diamond, welcome back to Jews on Film.
I'm so glad to be here. I'm so excited to do City Slickers too.
Yeah, the search for Curly's gold. We're back. Today, we're actually discussing the film Hester Street. Hope you prepared the right movie, Jason. Directed and written by Joan Micklin Silver from the year 1975. I want to ask, starting up top, if you could kind of set the table for us in our little tenement apartment here and kind of give us a sense of why you picked Hester Street to discuss, you have this book out, Kaplan's Plot. Maybe you could kind of tell us a little bit about what the book is about and why you chose Hester Street to discuss on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, something I've always been fascinated with is assimilation. It sounds really strange, but, I think because I grew up, my mom's family has been in America a little bit longer, and on my father's side, I'm the first one born in America. I've seen the Jewish experience and the immigrant experience from different angles. And, as somebody who I think I was always drawn to the culture that the older culture that I really wasn't raised on. The Jewish culture I was raised on was, very Americanized, and so I started digging myself, and the things I got into, the things I was interested in kind of led me, first it led me to Hester Street, literally years ago when I first watched the movie, and I had never seen anything that in my mind sort of summarized everything I had started internalizing about the Jewish and immigrant experience in America in such a short amount of time, like 90 minutes. It's fascinating because it's like one of those movies and one of those themes that you feel like could be an epic. But but it just, the quick, just everything about Jake, in the first few minutes that you see, and then when Gittel comes and with Joey, and this, though I don't want to spoil anything, but it's fascinating to me how much they get in there, how much she gets in there in such a short amount of time. And with my novel, it's funny because I think the closest film comparisons are The Godfather 2 and maybe Once Upon a Time in America. Which, you don't think those are mobster films, but there's also assimilation, and there's also the immigrant story. And, I've always been fascinated with how, the things people have to do to make it in America. And, you're sort of seeing Jake, he shaves his beard. That's like a little thing at the start. If you're not aware of how important that is, when Gittel comes to America, that's like the first thing she notices. So it's like little things like that I'm just fascinated with, like what we give up in order to become American.
Our generation sort of takes a lot for granted that, what our parents have gone through, grandparents, things like that. And, just last week we were covering the cartoon version of this story, which is An American Tale. And we kind of covered a little bit of the same ground. But I think our past guest, Robin, was talking about how her grandparents, at such a young age were on these boats by themselves going to this new country, and harrowing tales. And, you see some of that in this film. So I'm excited to get into it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Even as you were saying it, Jason, that you were fascinated with assimilation, like you definitely gravitated towards the right movie. This movie engages with it, not just so directly in its plot, but I actually found with more nuance than we've seen in another movie we've covered on this podcast. So many of the questions, and we'll get into this in detail as we kind of get into the discussion, but I think it asks the question that you just posed, what do we give up to assimilate? But what do we gain from assimilation? Where is that tension between it? Like this movie, and especially from some key beats towards the end of it, it kind of leaves you in a place where not that it's not all bad or not all good, but that there is like an intentional kind of exchange that you're making with this assimilation question. And you have to kind of like, things are never going to be like they were, in the old countries, but you have to navigate that. And I don't want to tease too much of the conversation that we'll have, but I was so blown away by, the way the movie really raises those questions so directly.
I have a two-part question. Whoever wants to go first. Harry, can you IMDb summarize this movie? And Jason, can you bookshop.org summarize your book? So I feel like people are on the same page in terms of what we're talking about when we're mentioning the various things.
Do you want to do, I think you should do the movie first.
Okay.
I think that's
All
fair.
right.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. In 1896, a Russian Jewish woman emigrates to New York City's Lower East Side to reunite with her Americanized husband, who has changed his name and assimilated, but she struggles to adapt to her new life.
Yeah.
The one thing, before we jump ahead from here, like the one thing I'll call out is, it's so interesting to be watching this movie now and having this conversation. Like, this movie is set in 1896, right? The very beginning of the 20th century or towards the beginning of it. And obviously in 1975, when this movie was made, that era of audience wouldn't have been as intimately familiar, but maybe they would have had that kind of third generational experience, second generational, understanding the stories of their parents, and obviously the assimilation and really emigration story to America for a lot of, Jews to kind of this Lower East Side. Like, that continues for years after this, but I think they might have had some engagement with it. It is interesting, we commented on this before we were talking here, Daniel, but this movie came out now 50 years ago. So for us to have this conversation and just to imagine, like, our Americanized, what that kind of looked like and how we engage with that. And, hopefully this can segue into you talking about your book a little bit, Jason, because I know that that's kind of a generation later, but it really is, we are at a very interesting time to be engaging with this movie that already was reaching pretty far back, in 1975.
I didn't even think about that as 50 years. I didn't even think when I even said 1975, I didn't even think about that. That's fascinating.
It's probably the anniversary soon, 50 years.
Yeah.
So my book, Kaplan's Plot, takes place on two timelines. And one of those timelines, I believe it would be about 10, 12 years after Hester Street. So like the early 20th century, it follows two brothers, Yitzhak and Solomon. They escape Odessa very young. After pogroms, this, that, the other thing, and they come to America, and there's not really much that they're able to do because they're immigrants, and immigrants almost always start out at the bottom. And not only are they immigrants, but they're kids, and they have nobody to guide them. So they take separate paths, kind of a Cain and Abel-esque sort of thing, I guess. But Yitz sort of. He takes, I guess, I don't want to say it's the path of least resistance, but he falls into a life of crime in Chicago, where my family's from. And so we kind of trace you could look at it as his rise or his fall, however you want to look at it. It's the whole dystopia, utopia sort of dynamic. It's whichever way you want to look at it. And it's, at the same time, every other chapter is sort of, is his story and Solomon's story, and then the story of his grandson and his daughter, both of whom, his daughter barely knew him and his grandson never met him. They're trying to piece together his life while also kind of grappling with their own weird relationship. And, to me, it's like when you look at them, and also when you look at the younger, or when you look at the grandfather, all of them are silently dealing with generational trauma in one way or another. And that's sort of like the underlying theme of the book, I think. Like the things we don't realize we inherited the minute we're born, and the secrets that we don't know about. And so, that's just, I think that to me is like when you watch a movie like Hester Street, it might get like, you try to like think about it like 100 years later, which would have been 1996, little Joey's great grandson, could be marrying a Catholic girl and living on you never know. It's like,
sure.
It's just like, it's just fascinating to kind of think, but he has all this stuff that he'll never understand about himself or about his family. And even if we do know a little bit about our family before they came to America or in their early days in America, we definitely don't know everything.
Oh yeah. I'm sure there's lots of trauma that little Joey has inherited from what little we see in the film. But I think, I think there's tons that go on in our parents' and grandparents' life that I think earlier generations just didn't share as much. And like now it's much more commonplace to like talk about your feelings, to share your feelings online and things like that and be much more expressive. But back then it was all kind of bottle everything up. A lot of that, we're kind of discovering now. But I feel like we're in a good place to kind of hop into the context corner if that works, because we've got a sense of what the movie's about. We got a sense of what the book's about. So I wanted to give a little bit of context on the film, Hester Street. So Joan Micklin Silver, she was the child of immigrants. She went to Sarah Lawrence College. She studied, I don't know if she studied film per se, but she studied playwriting. She did a few plays, she wrote a few plays, and then eventually she wound up doing like some educational films for this organization called Learning Corporation of America in the 70s. And she wanted to focus it on the immigrant experience. And, I think initially she wanted to do Jewish immigrants, but they were like, no, that's too specific. Let's just make them Polish, like generic Polish. So, she ended up doing a couple of those, and then later on had this idea to adapt this novella called Yekel by Abraham Kahan. It's called Yekel, A Tale of the New York Ghetto. So taking elements of that story and kind of putting together, a very small film. She was a female in the 1970s, had yet to produce a feature-length film on her own, so nobody really wanted to do this because, for those who have not seen the film, it is black and white. It is a lot of it is in Yiddish, and it is very specific. And back then, specific was not something that people wanted to invest in. So her husband produced it. He was a real estate developer. His name's Raphael Silver. So he had like a real estate development company, but then he also had a film company called Midwest Films, because she was from the Midwest. And they ended up investing in the film. He invested the film about $400,000. He ended up putting it out. It ended up, doing really well, I think, in terms of critically. It was praised for a lot of good things and made about $5 million at the box office and got a nomination for Carol Kane, who was in her young 20s at the time for Best Actress. So she then went on to do a number of other things as well. Films like Crossing Delancey that we've covered before, and another film that
she did Between the Lines,
which
is actually great. It's on the Criterion.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'll check it out. And then
it's on the Criterion channel.
And then Chilly Scenes of Winter. I haven't seen those two films, but I think I really would like to check them out after. And
can I just say, I recently saw this. She did an adaptation of F. Scott Fitzgerald's Bernice Bobs Her Hair with Shelley Duvall.
Okay.
And I just saw it. It's on Prime, and I was like, oh my God. Up until then, I like Between the Lines, but for me, the Hester Street Crossing Delancey duo, like 20 something years, 15 years apart.
Right.
That's just like the greatest bookend. That's just perfect.
Those are perfect pairings. And I'd like to think that perhaps little Joey is still wandering around somewhere in the background of Crossing Delancey, or maybe he opened up the Judaica shop that she goes at some point. But I'd love to think that they're like in the same universe. That'd be really cool. Speaking of the Lower East Side, I used to live there on Grand Street. Any favorite Lower East Side memories that anyone wants to share? Since two of you are in East Coast, I used to live in New York, but anything that comes to mind?
I mean, honestly, like, this is going to sound, I don't want to sound disrespectful, but I used to DJ on the Lower East Side a lot, and I'd stop DJing around 4 a.m. and I remember getting out of the bars that I'd DJ, and sometimes I'd be drunk, sometimes I wouldn't be, but I would just wander around, and I would just feel like I'm oh yeah, I know this place. It's a weird thing. I don't really I actually don't. It's funny. My family, I think, they definitely came through the Lower East Side. I think everybody's did. If they didn't, everyone came through the East Coast. But as far as I know, my mom's family mostly made it to Chicago and New Jersey pretty fast. And so I don't really know what connection I have there. But it's impossible, not to like talk about it in a certain context, especially if you're Jewish or of immigrant style,
Yeah.
It's always felt like there's a power in that place that I just cannot get over.
I really love that. I mean, we were mentioning Delancey and Hester Street, even just for the two of those, I feel like I've gotten to see, what that life could have been like. And I just feel like, just to her credit, Joan Micklin Silver, these two movies, like they live in these worlds in a way that, it doesn't feel like a set kind of with costumes. Like you understand what life, they're not all centered on the neighborhood, even though, the streets are obviously in the names, but they do evoke this like, yeah, this is just like where everyone lives. Like some of the best sequences in this movie, in Hester Street are, when these characters are walking through what feels just like this bustling market, and you see all of these people and all this Yiddish and Hebrew all over the stalls. And, there is something really special about the area.
Yeah.
The set looks incredible. Like that they ddid such a good job.
So spoiler, I don't want to drop the bomb here, but they actually didn't film it on Hester Street. They filmed it on Morton Street.
In that neighborhood.
Yeah,
I didn't even know. I honestly, I didn't even realize. I actually would have, if you would have told me it's a movie set, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, even though that they shot it on the Lower East Side, to me is impressive.
Oh yeah,
how in the 1970s shutting down the Lower East Side? Wow.
Yeah. So they turned over a number of stores, but I think they filmed the film was shot over 34 days. But she said, I was watching this documentary on Criterion. Some German filmmaker interviewed her. They basically just like covered all the stuff overnight and then just left it. And then, they picked it up the next day. But like, had it rained at all, everything would have been ruined. But it sounds like, it sounds like it was a very shoestring budget, and they were able to really lean on, I think, a lot of like institutions in the neighborhood that were, preserving a lot of the Jewish aspect of things. So they were able to get props from different museums and things like that. One thing that I'll shout out about the Lower East Side is just kind of what we were talking about, is like the texture of like seeing old buildings, old signs, like the Eldridge Street Synagogue. Shout out to my old synagogue, Stanton Street Shul. All the synagogues and old buildings that have such history to them. And it feels really special to be like walking around those places.
Yeah, for sure.
I like that is the amazing part of it. Like it obviously isn't, it certainly isn't that community that it once was, that's depicted in these movies, going back 50, 100 years. And, part of that could be, an extension of the assimilation narrative that we're talking about. But, I'll speak to my own experiences. I didn't really ever spend much time down there, but I do remember once being there and kind of passing, Katz's Deli and Russ and Daughters. And like, I know they're very close to each other, and just having the sense of like, oh, wow, this is like, Jewish food, Jewish cuisine. Like we have our little corner. And again, this feeds even further into the assimilation questions about what those the institutions that those restaurants have become well beyond the scope of the Jewish community. But it was cool to feel like we still have this kind of little pocket of Jewish culture that it has existed through today in some way.
And you still also have Economy Candy right there, which is also like originally, I mean, it's still a Jewish owned business. And funny enough, a couple of years back, Sammy's, they reopened Sammy's down there.
Oh, nice.
Like right by Economy Candy. And then you have like Sweet Pickle Books, which the owner is a diehard Crossing Delancey fan and purposely opened it where she did.
It's amazing.
Susan Alexander has her jewelry store, and it's very like, she sells like very like your Boca Bubby would love this Judaica she sells. But it's like there's still some of that there, and I think people still want to preserve it, which is nice.
Right. It feels authentic to that experience at that time, and it's like very much like a throwback, but that's still around. Also just like the people when I lived there, so this must have been 2007 to maybe 2010-ish or so. But yeah, just like the characters I would meet, the people, and like talking to them about their upbringing. Some of them are like second generation Lower East Siders. And so they have like lots of fun stories to tell. So we're dealing with a very different era, early 1900s or late 1800s. So it's kind of a different time, but still same, geographic area and a lot of the, there's some similarities there. So I think we're at a good place now to kind of take a quick break. We'll kind of get right back into it. We'll be right back.
If you love bold characters on screen, you'll love seeing them come to life on the page. I'm Robin Schwartzman, and my new book, Drawing Influence, features over 150 caricatures of today's biggest cultural icons. Think Al Hirschfeld meets The New Yorker, with film stars, cultural legends, and unforgettable faces from our time. It's smart, funny, and timeless, just like the movies we love. Grab your copy now at drawinginfluence.com.
Welcome back to Jews on Film. We are here with Jason Diamond talking about the film Hester Street. Harry, over to you.
I was hoping we could dive into this question of assimilation and really focus on the way that this movie explores it. And just to kind of catch up our audience, so much of this movie is about, we covered this in the IMDb summary, but this one character, this Yankel character goes by Jake now. He's been living in America, and kind of 30 minutes into the movie, everything kind of comes to a head when his wife finally makes it over. And there's this immediate tension between, he wants to assimilate, gets all his wife to assimilate. He wants their son to assimilate. There's this very, kind of intense moment where he cuts off the payas of his son. So like a really,
dramatic part.
Very much so. Like, this movie really is very, not just on the nose, but explicit in its questions of assimilation. And so much of the movie in the beginning is about this question of, this tension between wanting to assimilate and wanting to preserve old tradition. But one of the most fascinating things I think this movie does is it very subtly starts to shift, Gittel's character in particular, in the way that she starts to engage with this question of assimilation. And as much as you think you're watching a black and white movie, there's a moment at the end that I think calls everything into light. And that's obviously towards the end, once, spoiler, when the central couple is in the middle of a divorce process, and someone refers to, Gittel's son as Yassala, which is, what we know his name to be, but she corrects them and says,
"So what's the name, the little one?"
Yassala.
Yes.
No, his name is Joey.
Which is the name that, Jakey Yankel had been trying to impose on him. And I think for me in that moment, I had this revelation of like, oh, interesting. Like, this wasn't a black and white movie. There actually is something about what we bring to assimilation, what it asks of us, what we get from it. And I wanted to get to that point just because I really wanted to center the conversation around there. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on if you felt the same way about what the movie was saying, and maybe we could break down a little bit where we think the movie was positioning itself relevant to this, classic assimilation story for Jewish immigrants at the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that really kind of blows my mind, and that's when you think about when this movie comes out, I believe Fiddler on the Roof would have come out in what year? 70,
Let me check.
69? So Fiddler on the Roof
71.
Oh, okay, so Fiddler on the Roof comes out in 71. This comes out in 75. And then the Yentl comes out in, I think, 82, 83. And so you have these three films that are all they're all based off of works by Yiddish language artists or writers. And it really kind of blows my mind how Fiddler is, I love Fiddler and I love Yentl, and they're both musicals, so it's a little hard to like compare, but Fiddler, there's sort of like, it's Tevye the Milkman, it's iconic, you have to, but like, there's little traces of like, this is what's going to happen. His daughters one's going to marry a Gentile, the other's going to go live in the gulag with her husband, and they're going to move to America, and then God knows what's going to happen when that happens. And then Yentl is, we see her on a boat, she wants to go study Torah, and God knows whatever she gets into over there. But I didn't think those movies really tackled assimilation. It just sort of more gave this sort of view of the old country, and it was like, to me, that's sort of kind of something that is kind of carried on, this sort of like whimsical, it was so nice back then before or between the pogroms and before Hitler and yada, yada, yada. With Hester Street, it's It's just they get to America and it's not what anybody had hoped it would be. It's not the land of dreams. It's not this wonderful place where everybody's free and happy. And in fact, there's that point where the part where they're walking around the park talking about like they don't see any Gentiles, yada yada yada. Gittel is essentially kind of trapped in what must be like a couple of streets, unable to really do anything and unable to find any bit of happiness because she's cooped up inside the house and actually it's almost Kafkaesque. Yeah.
It's like she's like literally locked in.
Yeah. It's really bleak. And so, to me, it's like what we see from her, like, obviously Jake is like the poster boy for assimilation by getting rid of the beard and yada and all that stuff. But, and he like, he wants to dress like the Gentiles and he wants to, he wants to play baseball with his son and all that stuff. But as we see in it, I guess you made a spoiler, in order to be happy and in order to like make it in America, get till at the end, she's wearing her natural hair out, which that's totally fine. I don't, but like that's like a big deal to her at the start of the movie. Like only the Gentile women do that. And then the thing, like you said, it's like, I think it's the most like poignant scene is where she says, call him, his name is Joey or whatever. It's the way she says it. It's one of the great lines, deliveries. I mean, Carol Kane's a genius. But that line, the way she does it, it's like anguished, but it's also like defiant and it's haunting. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, the film like takes a journey with assimilation. I mean, we start out this scene and everyone's kind of like eating, maybe they're at a deli or something like that. And then this sort of guy who's like fresh off the boat comes in and they sort of instantly sort of mock him and tease him, take his hat.
Sit him right down there. Hey, come on. Sit.
Scared to death. Look at him. Boy, they must have oxygen steerage these days. Oh, he's laughing. Look at him.
Oh, yes. Vader, another glass tea, huh?
Wants to say a bracha on the wine and things like that. And, I feel like it's one of these things where Jake not only needs to like get in and shed his Yonkel identity, but then he needs to like be so American that he's like shitting on other immigrants that they're not assimilated enough, which is like, it's heartbreaking to see. Yeah, it's terrible. One thing that I sort of noticed, you mentioned, Jason, this sort of insularity that this film takes place in. We occupy a few streets in the Lower East Side. I didn't, and maybe I missed this, but I didn't really get the sense that, from an outsider's perspective, do other people view them as assimilated as well? Or are they just like, yeah, you're Jewish, like, as assimilated as you want to be, you still have this kind of like weird European accent and I'm not going to treat you as like an American,
I think that's that scene in the park where, Jake's walking around and he's like,
Look on me. Give a look on me. Am I a Jew or a Gentile? Don't forget that you know me. Just by what you see. What do you say?
and, Bernstein and get a laugh at him. And we're like, of course you do. No, don't listen to my voice. Don't like whatever. I'm just saying the way that I look. Am I Jewish?
Right.
And I think Bernstein has the line. He says like,
a Jew is a Jew.
What do you know?
There actually is no such thing as this kind of true abandonment of your past. And I would almost argue that Jake, doesn't even want to shed it and maybe isn't aware of that because of who he spends his time with. He spends his time with all of the other kind of immigrants and he's not necessarily running to escape it. I mean, I know he's looking for, a new wife that's a little bit more Americanized, but she's still an immigrant. She's just He's just a little bit more assimilated than he is, but he still has his community. He still lives in, the Lower East Side Jewish ghetto, and I think benefits from that. So I think he's even not sure, what he's looking for. And like you said, even if he wanted it, I don't think anyone else would see him as anything but Jewish.
Right. Yeah, it is. And a lot of these, there's a lot of symbolism in the film. Like you mentioned the wig, Jason, there's, Jake shedding his paperboy hat for like a black hat and like putting on a nice outfit. And even the way that like wardrobe is used to signify where people are at on their journey. I think, Gittel wears these kind of like frumpy outfits initially, and then who's our neighbor? What's her name? Do we remember her name?
Kavars. Is that Doris Roberts? Is that the one that?
Oh yeah,
Doris
Miss Kowarski. Yeah,
yeah.
And she comes over and she's like giving her like what are those things called? The things that like
that tightens your waist.
Yes,
I forget what it's called too. Yeah,
I wear it every day. I don't even know what it's called. No.
Yeah.
Those
Three
things.
guys can't figure this one out. I forget.
That thing.
Corset.
I feel like,
corset.
There it is. She changes her outfit. She gets like a corset on. We have this scene of her like putting it on, and she puts it on to impress Yankel, and even that is not enough for him. There's a lot of symbolism here, and try as they might, I feel like you can always assimilate within your like shade of gray, but no one is ever going to see you as what it is you want to be. And I think that's just like part of the struggle here, I think, with some folks, who are trying to fit in, but no matter how much you do, you're still that person with the funny accent, and, a Jew is a Jew. So,
I mean, that's something to me that like, Steve Keats, I think, obviously
so
Carol Kane is just immaculate in this, but like if you watch Steve Keats, if you see it, I've seen it like several times now, and you watch his face, and he plays a guy who's so uncertain of himself, and so just like winging it, but he's not going to admit that because he knows,
right.
And I think there's something about that that's really fascinating. Like, he's not confident. He's not, the fact that he has to ask if they know he's Jewish, like he's asking because you could tell he feels, something is gnawing at him, pulling him one way or the other. He doesn't know how he wants to feel. And there's something about that to me that's so telling.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the brilliant things this movie does. And, you kind of called this to mind, Jason, before when you were talking about how, unlike, Yentl Fiddler, this isn't even American Tail, which we discussed last week. Like, this isn't a movie about the kind of danger, that this prospect of, what's behind us, what's coming. This isn't kind of framing. There's actually no external force that's kind of weighing on these Jews. Like, this is a movie that doesn't show the journey. It starts in America. And I think the fascinating part is then you get into this environment where no one actually is, they're not forced, they're not, threatening you, but they're also not forcing you to assimilate either. Like the way you were just describing Jake's kind of experience as being like so torn internally.
Yeah.
What's so interesting about this movie is that, and I don't want to deny the kind of external forces that obviously forced assimilation. Like, to a certain extent, you could be like Bernstein and not make a living wage even to afford to room somewhere. And like, there obviously were a lot of reasons why this assimilation was socially, societally, economically imposed on many of these Jewish immigrants. But the framing of the movie is that the question of assimilation, the threat of assimilation, and to what extent that actually goes for each of the characters is completely imposed by themselves on each other. It's all for them to debate. Like, assimilation is a question that they're engaging with. And I think what's fascinating is that, Jake, like I was saying, kind of pushes it to a certain extent, can't give up some of his creature comforts, but also works too hard to get away. And I think Gittel is an incredible character because by the end of it, she's learning how to navigate it. She is dressing a little bit differently. She is shedding her hair. I think one of the most telling things is at the very end of the movie, when she's talking to Bernstein about, like, you kind of hear that final conversation as she's walking with Bernstein. She says, like, I'm going to open up a market and start selling things. That is very modern. That's not, clearly what she was doing back in the old country. And even Bernstein doesn't get it. He's like, what are you talking about? You're going to like shop. And she's like, I want you to learn. You're going to keep learning. I'm going to take care of our family. Like, she is understanding what it means to survive, how to assimilate to survive without giving up, that tradition that she holds so dearly. And that I think is, just such a beautiful arc for a character.
She's just a brilliant character. I mean, she's not an idiot, like, and it's like, she is naive at first. And I think anybody who comes to a new country has to be a little naive, but she's just, I love that about her. I don't know. I love that character.
I like that
so
naive.
much.
A heads up, Harry, just if you're going to go to her store, she doesn't sell seltzer water because they have it available on the streets. So like, what's
I got excited when she said that. I was like, seltzer, that's great. And then she shot it down because she's savvy. She's paying attention.
Yeah.
He knows like that's not the way to get ahead.
What is the film coming out and saying against assimilation when you have like a person like Mr. Bernstein who doesn't really assimilate so much? Like he does like talk to her and like touch her hand. He does a little bit of transgression within his, lane. But I think like the film is trying, my thought is that like, you compare Yankel and Jake to Mr. Bernstein in terms of like their values and things like that. You assimilate and then you became money obsessed, you become unfaithful, things like that. Mr. Bernstein is like studying Torah. He's teaching this child who's not his own. He values education. He seems like a very good parent, keeping your old world values. And then I feel like what we were just saying is that like Gittel is kind of like maybe the perfect marriage of both, where she has a little bit of that like new world savvy while keeping some of that tradition of the old world alive. Kind of marrying the two, if that makes sense.
I think Bernstein is a fascinating character because it's like he wants to obviously hold on to whatever traditions or whatever beliefs he has. And it's like when you play that game where you're like, what happens after this? Which I always love to do.
Sure.
I feel like he has the hardest time in America because, a few years, the new century rolls around and things only pick up, and being a man of, being a man of any kind of learning, but especially like religious learning it's definitely not going to like make you any money. So,
right.
It's kind of hard to imagine like how he fit into the world, besides, hopefully being a good father or father figure or whatever he is to Joey at that point.
Right. I think either Gittel's like operation expands and then it becomes like Whole Foods. We flash forward and it's like Whole Foods or Wegmans or whatever. Or Mr. Bernstein stays in the sweatshop that he works in until everyone else like passes on, and then he owns the business. He becomes like a schmata guy, and then fast forward, it's Ralph Lauren or something like that.
Hey.
I like that.
Or
50 years later.
Gittel's, I don't know, dress emporium or something.
Yeah,
it sounds like
why not?
Where every Orthodox girl goes to get her first real dress.
Oh, I like that. Daniel, I'm interested in what you were saying before, just about like, where do they fit on like the transgressive realm of assimilation?
Sure.
And if they go too far, how does that send them? And I actually think what this movie does with its assimilation is that it actively doesn't blame that on their characters. Like Jakey isn't a worse person because he's adopted like this American culture. He's Americanized and that made him worse.
Right.
I think he was just a jerk. And I think he used assimilation
Okay,
as a way to like put other people down. Like so much of the earliest parts with Gittel, there's that great line where, we have this awesome scene I mentioned before where where Yankel is, or Jakey is taking Joey, through the, the market, and like he's teaching him.
Horse.
He's literally training him to speak English, which I thought was very funny. And then they get back and Gittel says, maybe you could take me outside. And he was like, no, I have work tomorrow. Like you can't go. Like she was ready and willing to learn to engage. He needed her to be this kind of like old world, old country, incapable of civilizing, so that he could justify his own cheating and his own stepping out on her in his own life. Like he used this question of assimilation of like, it's not my fault. She refuses to assimilate, when I think the point is assimilation, as dangerous as it can be, is kind of neutral in its way of like, there are ways to engage in society, to be a contributing member, to, get kind of the economical, the economic savviness, from it, and whatever she kind of takes in her, character's growth, without it being a good or a bad thing. The assimilation, I guess, isn't inherently corrupting.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
The thing about Jake that really gets me is if you watch the movie and you kind of place it in this context of like, what kind of a character is he? And you kind of like think about the way that, especially the 70s, the schlemiel was really becoming sort of a, you started seeing it more in films. I think the Woody Allen films kind of like made that a trope. But like, there's this like thing I remember reading years ago, like about like the difference between a schmuck and a schlemiel, and he's one of the like most clear. He's clearly a schmuck. like and it's like, I forget, I have to go find what it was, but I remember just thinking that I'm like, he has everything he could ever need or want. I mean, he doesn't have everything, but he has this wonderful wife who loves him and the child and all this stuff. And he's what is he doing? And the grass is greener on the other side. And, he's doing a good job at his work, obviously, but he doesn't care. He doesn't see how, things are going well for him. He sees America. He sees, he needs more, and he sees Mamie, or whatever her name is, as this like hot, still Jewish, but, kind of, right. I think, loose woman who's more
but
fun.
Even in the absence of Mamie, I feel like when she like shoots him down and she's like, what, you think you're the only player in town? Like, I'm going to go with this other person. And then he then goes to some other woman who he apparently has, some familiarity with, and he hangs out with her. So like, he seems like a kind of a scumbag, so maybe it's not assimilation to blame, but it is just, Yankel's character.
Yeah, he's a schmuck.
Yes. I want to talk about the immigrant experience and the way that it is depicted in this film. I'm thinking specifically of that really powerful scene where Yankel goes to pick up his son and his wife at kind of like a immigration, center. So, there's like cages everywhere and there's just lots of chaos and people there. And he's kind of looking around, she's looking around, and just the way that, the way that he interacts with people. And I want to retract my earlier statement, because before I was just saying that like there's no external validation or non-validation of Yankel as a character, but I'm just now thinking about the fact, like when he talks to the judges or the people who are processing the paperwork, they like don't understand him at all. So maybe that's the scene that I was kind of looking for. It was kind of a blink and you miss it situation. But what are your all thoughts on how the immigrant experience overall is kind of depicted in this film?
Can I just add one more thing about Jake that I totally just, I'm calling him a schmuck, but he's also in mourning. Like, that's the reason his wife comes over, is because his father had died.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And like, that's the reason we see him. I think he puts on, I think he says, Kaddish, I think, or so. I think
so. He like wraps himself in like a tallis. Exactly.
Yeah. So like, he's also like,
hurting.
I think that was like his, that was probably a shock to him. And another, like, that's like his last tie to the old world is gone, as his father was there, but his wife is there now. And, there's something about that that's really...
No, that makes sense.
I was going to say, I think that actually can tie pretty well to that question of the immigrant experience, because I think so much of his experience is feeling very cut off, from his past. And I don't know how much that pushes him to try to retain pieces of it, because, I think there is a part of him that can't let go of certain things, but or maybe there's a part of him as this immigrant that says, I left behind my family and I wasn't there for my father, when he died. I have to justify this by, making something of it, by doing something, I can't be making, I forget what it is. It's like $6 a day. I need to be making $12 a day so that I can, pull myself out of it. Like, so much of that is, part of that immigrant journey of kind of like finding your way up, going to a country like America and finding that mobility. So I think a big part of that has to do with, the family he's left behind.
I mean, something that really struck me, this, I don't know if any other movie has done such a good job. I mean, I Once Upon a Time in America, I think looked great, but besides that, I can't think of any movie that ever really showed what a true turn of the century Jewish neighborhood looked like. And there were only a couple. There was I think there was Lower East Side, where they herded like most of the Jews into. I think Philadelphia, Jersey, and Maxwell Street on Chicago, which is where a lot of my novel takes place on. When I was researching that, something that I would, find interesting was like, and this is the same thing on the Lower East Side. Everyone you saw probably was Jewish, but they weren't from your shtetl. They weren't from your town. They weren't even from maybe your part of Russia. They maybe spoke a different dialect of Yiddish.
Right.
Maybe they had a different Rebbe. Maybe they were all, and that was the first time a lot of these, that must have been a crazy culture shock when you think about that. It's like, some Jew from Romania barely could speak to some Jew from Poland, even though they speak the same language. They don't, it's like,
Right.
Or they have different ways, it's really fascinating when you really think about how small of a world that was.
Yeah.
And how it kind of like essentially was really small when they left, because they left wherever they were from in Eastern Europe. They come to this great big country, and then they are immediately living in a small place again, but it kind of like expands in a way that it doesn't like take them anywhere, but they have all these different people and different ways of talking and different ways of living, but they're all Jews. And there had to be something about that, I imagine, that must have really screwed with a lot of people who were like, maybe I don't have a place here,
right?
Or maybe people from wherever, Belarus or Odessa or Lodz or wherever any of these people came from, oh, I don't know what these people from this place are like.
Right.
And it must have really been confusing.
Right, because the outside world sees them all as the same.
All the same, yeah.
To themselves. I want to bring up a story actually that this just reminded me of, that I think I actually even have told on the podcast, but let's just assume it was like 60 episodes ago. But about my grandfather who, came over to this country, or, his family came over later than when this movie takes place. But when he was growing up, in 40s, 50s, whenever it was in kind of in Elizabeth, New Jersey, he had this experience where he was from, my family was originally from Germany. So we had the kind of Ashkenaz Yeki traditions. Adensus, Germany. It's actually where we get the name Adensasser from. Thank you, Daniel.
Definitely named after you guys.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure someone went back and said that great family that came from here.
Those Jews. Let's name it after those Jews.
Yeah, I've looked up the history of the place. Most of the synagogue, bylines are, it was burned in this year. It was burned again in this year. So not all great. But anyways, so because he was German, he was a Yeki Jew, that meant that unlike most Ashkenaz Jews who put on their talis when they get married, as kind of that's when they start wearing it to pray, to daven, Yeki Jews would do it at their bar mitzvah, so at the age of 13.
Oh, okay.
And the story that my grandfather tells is that when he was in this shul, in Elizabeth, New Jersey, he was called onto, the stage by the rabbi there at some point. And I think he said this was a little bit before he was going to be bar mitzvah, but the rabbi said to him, Sam, I know your family's from Germany. So in a year, when you turn 13, what are you going to do? You're going to put on your talis, right? And my grandfather said, yeah, that's the plan. And he said, no, you're not, because you're not in the old country anymore. You're in America, and you're taking on our customs, and we don't do that until you get married. And that's still something that I am salty about years later. But I think it reflected this mindset of like, we came from these disparate, places, and whether it was because, we were forced to kind of consolidate, to kind of hold on to our collective Judaism, or whether it was because, it would have been kind of just like a mess of just different traditions, and there wanted to be. And I know that this was kind of the sentiment of one, institution, of one synagogue, of one shul. Like, and I don't know, if this represents the whole cultural Jewish experience, but that was a story that really resonated with me as like, you're in America now. We're going to do this all the same way. And that's kind of the way things go from now on.
Did you wear a tallit at 13, Harry?
I didn't, and I was very jealous of my friends who did, and that's something that I vent to my family about all the time, and it's a fun story now, but I still don't, and I don't think my children will either.
Must have been traumatic. The rabbi, like you said, called him up on stage and asked him in front of people, or?
I love my grandfather, and I would never disparage him, but who knows, what details of the story were kind of heightened to make things a little bit more intense, but maybe that is how it happens. Exactly. Yeah. My family has a saying, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. So but this is true. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying who knows how it happened. Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of interesting that we are able, similar to the way with, the way that the film depicts assimilation, we are able to view the immigrant experience as both something, that we should be ashamed of, or like people are telling us not to wear our tallit because we're in the new country. But that on the same end, like there's a lot of opportunity, right? So like, I think, the business opportunities, at least Yankel is like pursuing these as an immigrant. I think he's got these big ideas, and maybe it's dipping a little bit into the assimilation thing, but just finding your your parnasa, your way of life, and whether that's like becoming a landlord or being somebody in the sweatshop and owning things. I think with it, with the difficulties of being an immigrant, obviously the language barrier and being seen as another, things like that, there's a lot more possibility available. And I think the film sort of does a pretty good job of balancing the two. What do you think? Is there something there?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Jake especially, you're kind of seeing, again, I called him a schmuck, but he is an immigrant. And it's like, it's like there's this thing where it's like immigrants come here and, look, we're spoiled. We're reaping the benefits of what our immigrant parents or grandparents or great grandparents or even great great grandparents did. But, they will work and work and work and work.
Yeah. The hustle.
And and it's just like, we're seeing it through the lens of a 90-minute film. But like, to me, it's like, he's a sort of example of like, at some point, he's just going to either keep working and working and working and working. And he's going to hope, maybe have a nice little life at some point because he worked so hard, but his kids will definitely have the nicer life, or he'll figure out some scheme. Like Jake seems like a schemer, like or a guy who would be like really enticed by a good scheme. And his new wife definitely seems like she knows people who might have some good schemes, but he's not like, he doesn't strike me as like the kind of, he works because it's not a means to an end. He thinks it's a means to the next thing. But I don't think he's ever going to get that next thing. Cause as I've mentioned,
the dance studio is not going to work out because he had to spend how much money? Like $200 to divorce his wife and pay off all the witnesses and things.
300.
They say it at the end. 300. Yeah. I mean, he wants, he has all these ideas to open up his own dance studio because, the film sort of opens up with them doing sort of, is it just dancing to learn how to dance so you could go to the dance clubs and fit in? Is that the idea? Is that sort of
I think
something like that?
I mean,
okay. I want to make sure I got that right.
It's like you meet enough immigrants in your life, and like so many of them are sort of just like, they're fooled into believing that, oh, this is a good business idea because somebody convinced them it was.
Yeah.
And again, I talk about Gittel being naive, but it's like there is a naive. It kind of comes with the territory, like if you don't know the calls or the things you have to be paying attention to in America that might signal a falsehood or a scam or and I just feel like Jake especially if you've read enough Yiddish literature is kind of especially like the forward writers like who dealt with humor, that's their whole thing is like these guys are just idiots who will just keep falling for stuff. It's like he's definitely gonna fall for more. Yeah,
definitely. Harry, anything else to add on immigration?
No, I think we covered a lot. I think I'm ready to wrap us up unless there's anything more you wanted to slip in there, Daniel.
No. I think you're spot on, Jason, with your you pointing out the fact that these immigrants are like, always looking for the next hustle. I feel like in your book, Kaplan's Plot, available now wherever books are sold, I feel like both your characters, Yitz and Solomon, are both like, I mean, Solomon chooses to become a butcher. It's like an honest trade, and he stays with that. But I think Yitz is like, as he's climbing the ranks, and he's doing a lot of different things, a lot of different rackets, whether it's like gambling or working in the Schwitz or getting into, making booze and all this other stuff. I mean, he's in everything. And yeah, it's just like that sort of absolute hustle mindset before like all the productivity experts were pitching it. Like that's the sort of, hardcore immigrant mentality of just like having to constantly hustle to make ends meet.
I mean, that's like my own family. It was like my mom's family. My great grandfather came here and he was religious and he ended up in Chicago he ended up in Chicago and he was a rag picker. It's like when you hear about that, you're like, that sounds like such a Dickensian thing, but no, it was a totally normal. That was a trade that a lot of Jews, and he realized, he's like, oh, maybe I'll just get these little bits of metal that I find and do more with that. And
Right.
he turned that into like a scrapyard.
Wow.
He owned he owned a lot of this. He was like, oh, well, I have these scrapyards. Maybe I could, he had all these other, he like had a tow truck company, all these things. He's like, oh, if I tow the trucks, then I can scrap the car. These immigrants don't think like us. Like all Americans are in our own way. We're all spoiled.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if they're Jewish or not. Any immigrant to me is probably going to use their wits in a way that Americans we turn it off.
Oh yeah.
Like they see things that we don't see. It's, they understand things a different way. They're wired differently. And it's always fascinating to me just how much we crap on immigrants for that, because, we don't really give them much else. So,
and no matter like how much they tell us, whether it's our parents, our grandparents or whatever, then whenever they are like, you don't know how good you have it, I think the default reaction, the knee-jerk reaction is like, yeah, whatever. But it's like,
oh, yeah.
In truth, they went through so much hardship, and I feel like it is just maybe too painful or too complex to really grapple with what they're talking about. So we just shrug it off as Americans.
Like that's why when you look at those old photos, obviously when they're like those Andy Sweet photos of like the old Jews on Miami Beach and stuff, obviously those are a lot of Holocaust survivors. So it's like, there's a whole different realm there, but it's just like, you look at those pictures of like old Jews when they're just chilling on the beach, or when they're like, and it's like, that's a look of contentment that I'll never understand, because they went through it, and they aren't taking that. You look at a picture of like some like old Bubby on, Miami Beach in 1970, and you're like, I can't sit still on a beach. I can't sit still anywhere, but I'm like, she earned that. She earned, it's like literally, I'll never be able to say, I earned that little bit of sunshine. And that's something that's beautiful to me.
I feel like this is a perfect place to pause, take a break.
Nothing else to add to that. That's beautiful.
No notes. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back, we'll hydrate, and then we'll get into our lightning round. We'll be right back.
Hi, everybody. This is Julie Klausner, and I'm here to talk to you about my podcast, How Was Your Week? You are going to love it. Every week, I present to you an interview with a fascinating individual, and we're talking about something in particular. We sit down and we focus, even if it's on something extremely stupid. But there will be clips discussed, perhaps some sort of cultural event from decades ago. Recently, I had the filmmakers behind the new documentary about Tura Satana, who was the star of Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, on the show. It's a great interview podcast, but wait, there's more. Later in the week, I present a monologue in which I plug my microphone in and I talk into it about whatever I'm obsessed with that week, whether it be this case I read about where this one woman stole another woman's identity after poisoning a slice of cheesecake, something funny my cat did. I don't know. It's harder for me to describe the monologue part, but I do know that people really love it. Listen to How Was Your Week with Julie Klausner wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to Jews on Film. We are with Jason Diamond. We're discussing 1975's Hester Street. And now let's get into the lightning round category. So Daniel, why don't you get us started with the first question?
Sure. The first question, which should be maybe a little bit difficult to parse out, but what is the most Jewish scene of this film?
All right, you ready? I know you thought this wouldn't be easy, but the scene where the lawyer is trying to negotiate with Gittel, and you just see it turn on.
But Govnik will not come home no more, whether you say yes or no, Mrs. Or as we say, irregardless. You agree to a divorce, Miss Mamie Fine is giving you $50. $75. $75, you'll get a new husband, 1, 2, 3. Huh? All right. $100. $100, what am I saying? It's out, I said it, that's all, it's finished. $100, you're a rich lady, mazel tov.
Like you see him doing the huckster thing, like, $25. Oh my God. And then she's just like, you just look at her face and you're like, like she's been playing you guys the whole time. You guys are idiots. She's the brains of this whole operation. And I mean, like, I don't ever want to like buy into like stereotypes and gender roles, especially when it comes like, but like, it's pretty like my wife is so much smarter than me. Yeah. Like she would definitely like, that's exactly how it would go. Like, you know, it's like, yeah, well, it's like men are dummies. And I think nobody is. Yeah, we're schmucks. We're all schmucks. I don't know. I mean, this will probably come off, somebody will be offended by this, but like, I think Jewish women are just wired to understand that. That scene is just so like, there's 10,000 terrible stereotypes of Jewish mothers and Jewish wives, and they're mostly wrong. And then that scene kind of crystallizes to me what's so wonderful about Jewish women. Like, I'm like, that they're just smarter than, they just know they're smarter than the men. And they know, I don't know. It's just this thing that I've always picked up on. I'm like, Jewish men think they run things, but they definitely don't.
No. And then they kind of overcompensate, you know, trying to give that air that they're in charge. But I don't know that, you know, there is a Grateful Dead song called Women Are Smarter. Yep. And so I think, you know, there is a precedent there. I think, you know, you went one way, I'm going to go this way. I feel like, to me, the most Jewish scene is where Mr. Bernstein and Joey are sitting down, or Yossela, I believe. At this time, he's Yossela. But they're sitting down and they're going over the Aleph Bet, or Aleph Bays, as they say, and they're doing the...
Jetzt het Yossela, zoek me nog. Comets, Aleph O.
Comets, Aleph O.
Comets, baseball.
Comets, baseball.
Comets, Gimel.
And like that whole scene is just like, you know, studying Torah with a little child. I felt like that was like a very, you know, very well executed. You know, shout out to all the people who helped prepare all the actors for the Yiddish and Hebrew that they spoke in the film. I think Carol Kane did not speak Yiddish beforehand and was like trained with all of this. I think Stephen Cates had mentioned, or maybe Joan Micklin Silver had mentioned that like they had recorded tapes with Yiddish speakers and then they just kind of obsessively went over the lines. But that to me would be my Jewish scene, is Mr. Bernstein teaching Yossela sort of the ABCs in Hebrew, Aleph Bet. So yeah. Harry, how about yourself?
Yeah,
what is your most Jewish scene?
Well, first I'll just say I love both of those scenes. Like what you were talking about, Jason, it's so good because I think there's a moment where he's like, this lawyer is going up, you know, 25, 50, 75, where I almost took it as like she's like rolling her eyes disinterested. And I don't think it really clicked for me how much she's playing him until we learn, you know, a couple of minutes later in movie time that they're like, yeah, we have to give her $300. Like she worked, she must have been sitting there for 15 minutes while this guy was going up in small increments. And that I just thought like, wow, that was brilliant. And similarly, I'll just talk about your scene, Daniel, because I have so many thoughts on all these scenes. Yeah. But what I loved, the touch to that scene that I really loved was that they're getting they're going through the letters of the Aleph Bays, and the one that Yossela and Joey struggles with is the ch sound, you know, and of course, like that's because he's already a little assimilated, and he needs Bernstein to pull him back into the fold with like the ch. So actually, maybe I spoiled a good stretch, but I'll get to that later. But
it's okay.
My most Jewish scene, I'm looking through my notes. I have 12 here, but I'll just talk about one that I really loved. You know, other than all, like you were saying, Daniel, like the davening, like there's a moment where Bernstein, you know, starts benching, and it's the most like authentic, casual kind of, like it's not like a Jewish scene that's like making a big deal of someone like reciting the right. Like he literally is just kind of, you know, muttering it. But like, my real most Jewish scene Yeah, exactly. Because it's just like taken for granted, which I thought was very Jewish. But really, my favorite and most Jewish scene was when Miss Kowarski's kind of, pushing back on Gittel and like trying to push her to like dress up. And I wrote down some of the lines.
50 times I'm telling you, fix yourself. Look like a woman but lives in America.
It won't be a goya even for young people.
Yeah, what's the use? I'm talking to the wall.
She like talks about like, oh, you need to cover your hair. Like, I'm as pious as you. Like, we live in an educated country. You got to dress this way. And she's not telling her to abandon her faith. She's saying just recognize where we are and keep your tradition, but like be a person. And I think just the tone and the speech, and hopefully we could pull in some of those quotes because just the sound of it, I think sounded so Jewish, familiar, and like modernly Jewish to me in a way that I was like, that just brought so much good Jewish energy into the movie. So that was my
She
scene.
sounded so Long Island.
Exactly. Which maybe kind of helped me connect with my Long Island grandparents.
Yeah, it was very like Jewish mother, like very maternal, like she's caring for her in a way that like, but it's like a little bit of tough love. And I do remember the Gittel scene. It's kind of like that negotiation tactic where she didn't really say anything, right? She was kind of quiet the whole time, and then
I guess so. That was the first glimpse of it.
It's very, very good advice.
There's that. It's totally getting off track from this, but 30 Rock. The television show has the episode that I think about all the time where Jack Donaghy has like a Caribbean nanny and she wants a raise and he's like, you just can't have it. No. And she just kind of sits there and peels an orange and like, just like, so what are we going to do? And that's all. And he caves. And it's like one of my favorite. It's like, those are my two favorite negotiation scenes ever.
It's amazing.
Once again, really proving that women are smarter,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So our next category, by the way, just for the record, that first category was easy for us to pick out, but I feel like there was not, it goes to show you that this is a very Jewish movie, the fact that we were able to pick out three very distinct scenes that added a little bit, to what it means to be Jewish in this film. But the second category is the stretch of the podcast. So something that the filmmaker did not intend to be a Jewish, or biblical allusion, which, again, this might be hard to do, but any stretches? I feel like, Harry, you are bouncing in your chair. Do you want to go first?
I guess I struggled with this one, because there's so much Jewishness. The one thing that I'll shout out, which I only started developing about an hour ago, and one of you, I think it was Jason, kind of called, Gittel's living condition very kind of Kafkaesque, the way that she can't leave the apartment. And then I was like, wait, that is Kafka. And it's actually kind of metamorphosis. And it really is being like stuck in the room and forced to kind of become alienated from society. And the way that in this movie she resists it is by, leaving the room and making sure that she doesn't become this kind of, bug stuck in the room. And I'm just doing a little overview of metamorphosis. So Kafka, Jewish, a lot of people read into that story, questions of assimilation. I don't know what was intended, but I really saw some stuff there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I didn't really have so many stretches like the Cho one that I just mentioned of, the Cho representing Joey kind of being caught between two worlds and having to relearn his Jewish past after his payas were cut. Maybe that'll be my true stretch, but I just I needed to mention that Kafka one because he really got my brain turning a little bit with that. But what about you guys? Do you have any good stretches of the pod?
I would have liked to have known more about Jake's suits because he had some nice suits. I mean, did he make those suits? That was like he was kind of a dandy. And like, I thought that was an interesting sort of thing that it didn't get into enough. Like he definitely stands out amongst everybody else, which I think was probably the point. But I don't think there's as many stretches as I think it's context because I think people saw the movie, but I don't think they read the Yeckel stories. Was it a novella or was it short stories? Like there's a whole backstory to all this stuff. And I mean, it's not a stretch at all, but I almost wish there were more movies like this. I wish she had been able to do more with this story. And that's not, obviously she did it. She was a woman director, already a thing that was almost a near impossible feat back then. And even today, she did it on a shoestring budget. But yeah, it would have been cool if like she could have done more. I really wish she could have. Other movies, that is, not more with this movie. This movie's perfect.
Yeah.
So no, I have no stretches. I just answered it. It's a perfect movie in my opinion.
All right.
I love that.
Maybe we could workshop this one, like the scene of Mr. Bernstein and Yankel like coming home with like the sewing, like, you know, I think maybe they're just working overtime where they have this sort of, but maybe that's supposed to represent the sort of immigrant struggle that they have to like carry with them on their backs and bring it into the home life and, you know, try to, I don't know. I'm grasping for straws here, but I feel like there's a lot of symbolism, like I talked about, you know, with the clothing and things like that. But maybe like the creation of the clothing and the thing is sort of what's weighing them down, or something like that.
I read into that part as like they were coming up with a side hustle. That's what it seemed like to me, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Like a gig economy.
Yeah, gig economy. Yeah, immigrants.
Yeah,
it reminded me of that show. Do you remember that show on HBO, How to Make It in America?
Yep. Oh yeah.
It's kind of like a very Jewish version in some way, just that particular slice of it. But yeah. Anyway, sorry, Harry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to try to work with you because I like that. Like that, there felt like there was something significant about, you know, him being like a seamstress, other than obviously that probably being true to many of the immigrants that came over. But I was also thinking, you know, like I like that kind of carrying that baggage with him from the old country. I was thinking like, you know, tying the Jewish tradition together and like, you know, tying things out. Like I wanted to work with that because I do think that there's something to, you know, that particular profession, and especially, you know, clothing are a literal symbol of assimilation. And you can imagine that, you know, if whatever kind of clothing they're making, most likely Americanized kind of modern clothing, you know, Jake is buying at the store that he works, and Bernstein is kind of still, you know, going back to his trunk from the old country. Like that, there's something about the clothing there as part of their assimilation journeys.
It's a huge part of the film, I think, you know, and it's like, part of me wishes, I don't know, would this film have been like better in color? I know that it was like shoestring budget and maybe film stock cost more, but like for the period, it makes sense that it's black and white, but I would have loved to see like how vivid these colors of the outfits were, the streets. Like I'm sure nowadays you can definitely treat the film in such a way that everything looks a little bit scratchy and kind of like vintage looking, but you know, to be able to see a little bit of that color would be cool.
Do you know this is a weird thing that just popped in my head, and I was thinking about it when I was watching the film last time, but the suits that Jake wears, it almost reminds me, and this is going to sound like a stretch, but if you've ever seen Spike Lee's Malcolm X, like earlier in the films, Malcolm and the character Spike Lee plays, when they show up walking around in the like the basically those big zoot suits, it sort of has that same feeling where like nobody else is around them is dressed like that. They're calling attention to themselves. They look cool, weird, however people interpreted it, but they're still poor.
Right.
And there's something about that that's I find so interesting, you know, because like today, the way we dress still signifies things in a similar way, but like now we need logos and we need this, that, the other thing. He just wore these like kind of colorful looking dandyish suits, just like Malcolm X did, and it like kind of gives him this air of like he's interesting or he's culture. I don't know, something different. He stands out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think wardrobe plays a huge part of like how you feel about yourself, but how others perceive you. And I think like that's a way of like showing that you made it. Like, oh, I'm wearing a suit. Like, and you look at Mr. Bernstein, he's like, you know, got his like vest on with the tallis under or the seat under, and he's wearing his shirt. So like, yeah, you can derive a lot of information about someone just by like looking at them, and whether or not that's what they are inside or truthfully, it's just what they're projecting, you know?
Yeah, it's as soon as they open their mouth. I mean, that's Jake's scene when they're at the park where he just says, no, don't listen to what I sound like. Look at me. Like, do I look just like I am an American? And it's like, that only gets you so far.
A Jew is a Jew. So speaking of Jews, what is the lasting legacy of this film? Is it good for the Jews?
I'll let you go first.
I've been talking.
I'll get us started.
Harry, you go first.
I'll get us started with. I think yes, for sure. I think this tells a really cool. This paints a really vivid picture of, you know, a big part of Jewish history, of Jewish American history. Kind of puts Jews in this kind of, you know, immigrant firmament and tells the story of where they came from. And I think, you know, to the Jewish audience too, this is a movie that's very knowing about its character's relationship with assimilation, but I don't think it judges them too harshly either way. Like we already mentioned, Jakey is a little bit of a schmuck, so maybe he's judged pretty unfavorably. But, I think the movie correctly understands that the choice of how to assimilate, how far to assimilate, what you need to do to survive was an incredibly challenging one with no defined spaces. And I think it respects its characters that choose to give up a little bit of more of their tradition, and those who, cling to it, but still find ways to kind of be, active members in society. Like, I think this movie paints just a really beautiful and optimistic picture of both sides. So I found that to be very rewarding, and I love this movie for the Jews. So I would say very good for the Jews.
Very good for the Jews. I like it. Jason, how about yourself?
I mean, I have a hard time. I love movies set in historical different periods, but I generally grumble about how most of them have this like rose-colored glasses view of the way things were, or they're just mired in how depressing and terrible it was. And though, but you could do either. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I honestly, I think I said this earlier. It's one of my favorite films of all time. Like I'm not, no bones about it. It's truly one of my favorite. And it's partially because it's Jewish. It's so Jewish. Like it paints one of the most honest portrayals of the Jewish American experience, maybe the most that I've ever seen on film. But it also, as a movie that is based in a different time period, and like you guys said earlier, like so long ago compared, like even now the movie itself is 50 years old, but
right.
It really puts you there. Not many films, especially today, everything looks so CGI'd or it looks so overdone. Yeah. But you were talking about the black and white thing. I think the black and white thing only makes it feel more like a historical, like you're looking at a historical record playing out in front of you. Like, how did they get this footage? So I think it's honestly, it's just such, to me, it's just like personally, it's one of the most important films I've ever seen. Like, it sticks with me. I think about it all the time. It's good for the Jews. It's good for humanity. It's good for film fans. If you could consider film nerds part of humanity. That's a joke. I'm kidding. But I just think it's just a good movie. Like it serves the greater good in a way that a lot of films fail to.
Yeah. I love that.
I love that.
This is a really complex film that kind of wrestles with a lot of different things, like a lot of stuff we talked about, a lot of stuff we didn't talk about, but it really portrays like a wide swath of what it means to be Jewish at the time period in that particular neighborhood. It's not a uniform look at like, oh, all Jews are one way or the other. There's so many different ways of being an immigrant, of assimilating to different degrees, of being a schmuck, of being a wise person, someone who's very religious, things like that. So I think for the fact that like it shows such a diverse array of Jewish people, whereas nowadays, like you have one kind of Jewish person on screen, like you have like a signifier of like, oh, it's like a Shlemiel kind of person, or like an anxious kind of Jew, and like that is what Jewish means in some modern day cinema. Not all, but so I think I will say that this is astoundingly good film for the Jews. So that brings us to our last category. We're going to rate this film on a scale of 1 to 5 Jewish stars. Based on its Jewishness, not on its quality, in terms of the cast and the crew, the content and the themes.
I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say. I was like 5 across the board. I'm not going to I'm not even going to say anything too smart about it. Like, I'm not even going to try. It's just, I think this film is a masterpiece. And I don't usually get to say that about things. I'm very hesitant to ever say that. Because there are very few things that I hate saying somebody's a genius, or I hate saying something but I just love this film. I think it's just note for note perfect. Carol Kane is, I don't know who won the Oscar that year, but I don't know. Carol Kane's a genius. I love her. Joan Micklin Silver is one of the great overlooked filmmakers in American history. And it's really just, to me, 2 films she has other good movies, but those two films that I mentioned earlier, Hester Street and Crossing Delancey, like those alone, it's like Dainu. It's like she's, you know, yeah, there's just, you can't compare anything. Like she yeah, one of the greatest rom-coms of all time, if you can call Crossing Delancey that. And Hester Street is one of the just great films at the right time about immigration and Jews in America. That's, yeah. So to all the stars.
All the stars. All right, Harry, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm also hesitant to kind of come out, so hot with this just for how Jewish it is, and really only because I usually try to be protective of the 5 out of 5 stars that we've given out. I think in the history of the show, maybe to 2 or 3 other movies, but unfortunately for the sequencing of this, I'm pretty sure I gave it to the last movie that we just discussed. But it's going to be hard.
Story.
I mean, yeah, that it was an American Tale, and I don't know, we keep referencing American Tales the last episode. I assume it'll be out before this one, but if not, I guess there's a teaser for next week. But yeah, like this story and the way it's portrayed is so central, thematically to the Jewish American story, which is so much of our current Jewish story, including all of our current Jewish story, inhabitants of America that we are. But even these questions of assimilation and tradition and how that tradition manifests and how that's portrayed on the screen, not as an abstract idea, but in the literal traditional transmission of Judaism and the literal kind of sacrifices made to be modern. Like this is it. This is so much of the Jewish question. There are other facets of the Jewish experience, obviously, one centering around kind of holidays, tradition, family, of course. But I just think this is telling one of the core stories of the Jewish experience, and certainly one that I would put on a Mount Rushmore of, what is Jewish life like, or what is Jewish cinema like, if we're doing that experiment. So I think this is going to get another 5 stars for me. And I am interested to see, Daniel, if you've got reason to not give it that. But what do you say to this movie's Jewish rating?
This is a film that, like, made by a Jewish creator, Joan Micklin Silver, based on her family's history. Carol Kane is Jewish. Stephen Keats is Jewish. I have to assume a lot of the other cast is Jewish. It centers a Jewish story. There's Yiddish. There's Hebrew. There's learning. There's Tallis. I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to not give this one a 5-star. I did want to shout out Joan Micklin Silver for taking a story that is primarily, like, based on a man, Yankel's journey, and really, like, subverts the film and flips it halfway through. I don't know if we touched on that too much, but, like, you think that Yankel is going to be the main character of this story, but then about halfway through, once we introduce Gittel, she really takes the spotlight. So kudos to her for making Carol Kane, the center of the story. Like we mentioned before, it netted her a nomination for the Oscars. Like Harry said, Louise Fletcher from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest ultimately took the award that year as Nurse Ratched. But yeah, I think I'm probably just going to give this one a 5 stars, Harry. I mean, I feel like I would be a bad Jew if I didn't. I think this is a very, very Jewish film. It takes place in a legendary, Jewish neighborhood, the Lower East Side, among a lot of other immigrants there. But, specifically this film is focusing on the Jewish experience. So yeah, I'm going to go 5 stars.
Wow.
5 stars across the board. So
yeah, well done.
Jason, thanks again for picking this movie, Hester Street. I had never seen it before, so thank you for allowing me to check it out and to go on a deep dive into Joan Micklin Silver's work. Truly a great book, Kaplan's Plot. So
thank you.
Can you let people know where they could check it out and maybe see you on tour?
Hopefully every single bookstore has it. And, I always tell people buy it from your indies if you can. But I start my tour, my book launch, if you're in Brooklyn, is on September 15th at Books Are Magic. And then I'm going to Connecticut. I'm going to Miami. I'm going back to Brooklyn. I'm going to Chicago. I'm going to Milwaukee, Los Angeles, San Francisco, everywhere. I'm going everywhere. So you could check me out. I mean, you could find me on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find. Just Google my name, and I'm not the doctor who does the Kardashians' plastic surgery.
Got it.
Even though my family would wish I was. But
yeah. And I did hear a rumor that you're actually doing a signing at Gittel's grocery store on the Lower East Side. Is that true?
Yeah. Her great great grandson.
Cool.
He doesn't own it, but he knows the guy who owns the name, and they took it over, and they're doing a pop-up.
That's so cool.
Sewing a collaboration with New Balance sneakers or something.
Perfect.
This is all a joke. I hope people realize that's all a joke.
Yeah.
But that was good.
You got me really interested in those shoes, but I guess not.
Awesome. Harry, anything to close us out?
No, as you could hear from our rave reviews, this was an amazing movie. So definitely check that out as well. Read the book. They're good companion pieces. And it was great having you back on, Jason. Let's talk about this movie.
Thank you, guys. I can't wait to come back again.
Yeah.
Three-timers Club.
Then we'll feel you'll be the first, and then we'll finally do the what's it called? The gold City Slickers 2. What's it called?
City Slickers 2, the search for Curly's gold.
Yeah. Then we'll finally do.
But if we have to, we'll do it. I won't say no.
I think that's the only way you can get to 3. So take it or leave it.
Fine.
Yeah. But I think you need to write another book first in order, So,
It'll happen.
No, I'm kidding. You're welcome back anytime. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I said it a few times, but already I would definitely check out Kaplan's Plot wherever you get books. It's a really fun book. Really, I could really tell that there's a lot in there. It's like steeped in a lot of research, both of the old country and assimilation in Chicago. And even though your book takes place in Chicago, there's a lot of like similarities between the experience of New York immigrants and Chicago immigrants.
No, I would say, a lot of this book is based off of my mom's family, but also my dad's family in a lot of ways. It's like none of the characters are real, but they're all composites of people I've known in my life and things I've heard and experienced. And, I've grown up around so many, I always like to say I've grown up around so many different kinds of Jews.
Yeah.
Which you either understand there or you don't. But I've known so many Jews from like the Soviet Union, Holocaust survivors, Jews from the Middle East, Jews from South America. I've been lucky enough to know so many different people who have, come up different ways. And I basically just like honed in on what I've known the most and like what was most familiar to me. And what it kind of came down to is just like this struggle for survival. And that's like what everybody in my family that came before me, I think, did. They struggled to survive. And I'm lucky enough that I get to be in a position where my life is writing books about it. So I was hoping that if anybody saw the book and they were like Jewish gangsters and they thought, oh, this is going to be bad for the Jews, that they would open and they'd realize that what I'm trying to do is, pay tribute to the fact that all of our ancestors probably had to do something they didn't want to do.
Right.
So and we're lucky enough to be here. And that's something I'm always conscious of.
I'll give the book Jews on Film seal of approval of good for the Jews as well.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could print that on the cover. But no, I think it's like it's complex and like it similar to like the movie Hester Street. It depicts a lot of different Jewish experiences, and I think the book handles it very well. So have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Jews on Film is hosted and produced by Daniel Zana and Harry Ottensasser. Daniel and Harry edited this episode. Follow us on Instagram at Jews on Film and subscribe to our podcast to get new episodes. Thanks for listening.